Hello and welcome. While watching children or a loved one experience challenging times, and emotional hardship is extremely tough, especially when you don't know how you can or should help them. A common self destructive habit and behavior that people find hard to support loved ones through are abnormal and disturbed eating habits. Eating disorders are complex and come in various forms. And today we're here to chat about the warning signs and to offer tips to help you help those that you love. Eating disorders affect people of all walks of life. However, it's becoming increasingly common in adolescents and young people. Now, as a disclaimer, it is assumed that this is due to social pressures and stereotypes with the help of social media, of course. So, and that is just a disclaimer. I had to just put that out there. But despite the term distorted eating refers to food and is observed as a physical condition, eating disorders are in fact commonly associated with complex mental health conditions. It's very raw, unpleasant topic to approach, but necessary if we are to truly commit to doing all we can to offer our support to those in need. So, if you think your child is showing signs of an eating disorder or a loved one, it could be a friend, a family, or anyone in your life or in your circles, it is important to seek support and to help them to seek support as soon as possible. So, today, to show our support and to address this challenging topic, we welcome our special guest and one of our partners here at Kittypedia, Stel Coombe-Heath, a leading authority in binge and emotional eating recovery. Now, a little bit about our guest. Stel leads various programs on challenging mindsets around eating and healthy food choices. Now, she supports her clients to cultivate healthy eating habits and to build trust with food. Thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Thank you so much, Rachel. So lovely to be here today.
Likewise, and it is it's such a hard topic to address with anyone that you love, and to see them sort of almost morph from someone that they were to somebody else sometimes that we don't recognize. And it's so I'm really happy to go there with you today with the view of helping anyone watching and listening, so they can best know how to support people in their life possibly going through the same thing. And as much as I understand about this topic so far, I'm going to learn a lot more by the end of it by listening to you, of course. But my understanding is to get in there as early as possible when you start to see the warning signs, of course. So but the whole thing is, I guess, that you never really want to hurt the person's feelings, and that's the challenging part. My understanding. So not knowing how to approach it is the problem. So
Yeah.
although I guess we can never force a person with disordered eating to change, we can offer our support and encouragement and treatment. So I just wanted to know your thoughts initially on all of
Yeah.
that.
It is a really hard, um, subject to approach with anyone. And the reason for that is, even just from my experience, which we'll probably get into a bit later, I thought what I was doing was the right thing, so my behaviors with food was the right way, whereas everyone else was wrong. So approaching someone with that kind of view around their behaviors can be quite sensitive, and can be confrontational, in a sense. So it is usually, what I've seen, and what I've been asked a lot about lately is how do we support someone, or how do we start that conversation? So, and that's why we're here today, to just really start delving into that.
As well. I just wanted to read some stats in doing my prep for the chat today to give some context. I read that it's about 30% of young people are extremely or very concerned about their body image, and that stat comes from Mission Australia. And commonly, of course, when we think of eating disorders, we can assume that it's referring to females. However, I understand that more than 37% of people experiencing eating disorders identify as male. So I know that there's two big stats there, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on those two initially.
Yeah, I think if we look at the stats, okay, this is from a few years ago and it's grown quite significantly. 1 in 4 of the Australian population struggles with an, an eating disorder. And we cannot discriminate here with regards to gender. We cannot say it's a certain race. We cannot say that it can happen to absolutely anyone really
Mm-hmm.
at any age.
Mm-hmm.
From my experience, I've recognized now little behaviors that I used to do from very young. But when I speak to my clients also from the ages 4 to 12, these behaviors can become something that they just learn and that carries into adult life.
As well. Now, before we get into all the nitty gritty questions, because I have quite a few, I just wanted to acknowledge we published your article titled How to Support Someone with Disordered Eating. Now, for someone who hasn't read the article yet, can you please tell us what it's about and, of course, what inspired you to write it?
Okay, yes. So we often hear about eating disorders, but there's a lot of times when people experience patterns with food that are actually disordered as well. However, the behaviors have not been classified as an actual eating disorder.
Yes.
So I kind of wanted to highlight these signs and signals because these are the precursors of going deeper into further more serious eating disorders later on.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can start recognizing these signs, we can address them and possibly prevent harmful behaviors with food. Eating disorders aren't just in isolation most of the time. They are coupled with depression and anxiety, and sometimes when people feel so um, out of their body and so at war with their body, they can, want to do some serious harm to themselves as well.
As
So,
well. So,
mhm.
to begin with, I just wanted to establish what are eating disorders and how may they start as well.
Okay, so eating disorders is an extreme obsession with your body appearance, with weight, with food, with exercise, ways to make up for eating, and it becomes a preoccupation of life. And that's the number one thing here is it becomes absolutely the ruling thoughts and feelings of that person's being. They can't really function without thinking about how they're going to be with food or what their body looks like. Um, and it starts, I think that was the next question
Well, yeah,
was,
so I just wanted to establish, so eating disorders, is it right to say, is a range of psychological conditions that cause unhealthy eating habits to develop? So it's an obsession with food, with body weight or a body shape, would you say?
yes, that's correct. Yes.
So I understand that there's 4 common types of eating disorders that are professionally recognised and diagnosed by sort of a mental disorders association. So which are binge eating disorder, bulimia, anorexia, and other specified feeding and other eating disorders. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct. And it's only recently that binge eating disorder has been, recognized as a full eating disorder. Um, the other feeding disorders is actually a blanket. Like there's quite a few other behaviors underneath that as well, such as orthorexia, which is an obsession with food, which is very much one of the stems of the other eating disorders as well.
Mhm. And we usually assume that an eating disorder is related to anorexia or bulimia and people, depriving themselves of food for whatever reason. However, it's rarely spoken about the case of emotional eaters that can lead to a disorder. So I just wanted to have you just expand on this for us now, which is the flip side, of course, of someone with anorexia and bulimia.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know anorexia and bulimia, those are the two extreme eating disorders where you can see that you can see physically that, there is something probably going on with the person's shape. They might start losing their teeth, bone density, all the rest. However, with binge eating disorder, you cannot really tell if a person, unless you look for some signs, you can't tell by body shape or assume that an overweight person has binge eating disorder. You really just can't tell from that perspective. So, um, the main characteristics of the eating disorders are, anorexia is on the one extreme where they abstain from eating and they over exercise. Then you have bulimia where they eat, and then they have periods of binging, and then periods of purging where they actually either try and get rid of what they've done with usual purging methods, or um, abusing exercise or laxatives, those kind of things. Then you
Yes.
have binge eating disorder where there's no purging. So they will just continue binge eating. And then you have orthorexia, where there's an obsession with eating healthy, but they might not be purging either. So those are kind of just some of the different
Order.
examples. Yeah.
Now, I understand for 13 years, Stel, that you battled two eating disorders. What could you and would you be happy to share with us now about your experiences?
Yes, absolutely. So I've, you know, for 13 years, I struggled with binge eating disorder, or emotional eating, with bouts of binge eating, which then aggravated itself into full binge eating disorder and orthorexia. And what happened was I was in a really unhealthy career path, if we could put it that way. I didn't eat at work. I worked extremely long hours. And then at home, I would binge eat on food because I didn't eat anything during the day. And I didn't think that there was anything wrong with that. I just thought that that was a normal pattern. Then later on, I decided to become healthier. So I started exercising, started running. Um, I took that to the extreme. So I started running 60 to 100 kilometers a week to make up for my
Wow.
binge cycles. I would run to the gym 8 kilometers, work out for 2 hours, and run home.
Wow.
And so it became kind of exercise became an obsession for me, on top of my eating behaviors. I try to eat as healthily as possible. I cut out most food groups, and with that, everything just compounded. I always thought there was something wrong with me, and back then binge eating disorder wasn't classified as an eating disorder. So I would consult a psychologist, and they would tell me to just manage my emotions, such as my stress levels. I would go to a dietitian, and they would tell me to just be disciplined on a food plan, and I would do all those things because I want to really, take on board what the health professionals would say.
Mhm.
And I'd still fail. I'd still have these problems, and I'd still have these obsessions with food, and consumed my life really.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
so it really is that you understand the hardships that come with disordered food relationships, and really now how to overcome them, I guess, in a healthy, balanced way, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. It took me quite a while to recover, but eventually, when I did find someone who I could trust, um, I, was able to actually take the steps and, make peace with food, my body, and now I have a balanced relationship with both of them.
And so you're a holistic health coach. And you help many through this self transformation with different practices and techniques. So would you maybe just go through some of them with us now? So I understand you infuse yoga, mindfulness, and energy medicine in consultation with your clients to sort of help them. Would that be right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. So, from a when we look at an individual, we are not just about the food we eat. We're not just about our physical bodies. We are, we've got a physical body, emotional, we've got an energy body, we've got a, subconscious level that's, or unconscious level. And then, we also have our communities. We have the culture that we've been brought up. We've got our immediate family, and we've got other outside influences. So we cannot just look at, you know, any um, any person as a whole, and just look at the
Mhm.
food and just give them an eating plan and just help them nurture with nourishing foods. We need to make sure that we infuse different modalities or different things that will look after each layer of, humanity. or and so that this is where I infuse yoga in some of my practices, because some of my clients, they might not want to exercise, or they can't exercise, or they just don't have time to really move. So this is where physical asana yoga practices will come in handy. Other times we'll use breath work or meditation, visualization, to help them reach deeper into other emotional or physical wounds as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I just wanted to establish then, what is, I guess, the difference between an eating disorder and disordered eating? Is there a difference?
Yes. So an eating disorder, as we described, has this real obsession, and it becomes a preoccupation with, like, within your life. Whereas disordered eating is a range of irregular eating behaviors that may or may not really require a diagnosis. And this could be stuff like chronic dieting, fasting, skipping meals, even occasional binge eating, um, feeling like you don't have trust with food, being out of control with food, cutting out certain food groups as
Mhm.
well.
So, what are the signs and dangers then of disordered eating?
So the signs of disordered eating, you'll probably see people making excuses for not wanting to eat or eat with in public. There might be sneaking food. There might be hiding packages. There might be an obsession with counting macros or calories. Um, from my experience, for example, I used to track my calories on MyFitnessPal, Weight Watchers points, as well as an Excel spreadsheet that had formulas in it. I would track my running calories. I would track my, like, so it was really an obsessive kind of thing. So some people might just be really obsessed with, like, burning those calories. Other signals would be disappearing just after meals or avoiding meal times. Um, Little children with AFRID are very sensitive to certain textures or tastes. So they might refuse to eat certain foods from that perspective, not because they're fussy. It could just be because that's really overwhelming. And they actually just fear those foods in quite a big way.
Mhm. So, how can we look for the warning signs with loved ones? Is it just it's just a shift from normal behaviors to some of these more abnormal and different behaviors? Would you say?
Yes, yes, definitely. And this is, I kind of touched on this earlier, but when I actually, through my own experience, understanding disordered eating and eating disorders more, and working with my clients, I've actually started recognizing small and remembered small little patterns from myself when I was young. I'm talking 3, 4 years old. I would sneak food. I would eat in secret when my mum wasn't at home. I would, if there was a birthday party, I was the one standing at the cake table where all the other kids were running around playing, those kind of things.
Mhm.
I would while everyone was not looking, I'd go take something else more off the cake table. So those are the little things where, it might seem endearing, but those are little warnings as well. Like with Afrid, again, there's this extreme refusal to eat. They might, be very emotional with um, when you present them with foods that they cannot actually agree with in that perspective as well.
Mhm. So, talking about supporting, as we were saying at the start of the interview, how can anyone listening and watching support someone with disordered eating them, especially their children?
Okay, so I think the one of the biggest things we need to all do, and this is really hard because we have a really large social media influence,
Hmm.
but I got most of my messages about my body and dieting from magazines that I would see at eye level at the checkout counters, or what the gossip magazines that my mom would buy. On the front page, there was always a celebrity or some housewife who has lost weight. The
Hmm.
weight loss was praised, or there would be a secret diet that someone's on. So even without social media, I already had those messages that in order for me to be happy, I needed to lose weight, I needed to be thin, then I'll be successful, all those kind of things. um, so and then we have now the diet industry, who that has just grown exponentially. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, as we know, and everything we see nowadays is 100-calorie meal or low sugar, low fat. So what we're creating is a real fear about foods, and a real perception of what is good and what is bad when it
Hmm.
comes to food. So when we, especially around young children, we need to be very careful about how we describe even food or our bodies. Often we pick at ourselves. Someone will give you a compliment and you would say, oh no, I still have more weight to lose, or I feel fat, or whatever we say, and we don't really realize how that absorbs. And um, I had my niece the other day ask me, she's 6 years old. She offered me some chocolate and I said, no, thank you. And she said, are you on a diet? And I'm like, okay, first of all, how do you know about dieting? She was 6. And I said to her, no, I had a lot of chocolate yesterday because it was Easter. So I'm done with chocolate. She's like, she couldn't understand it. She's like, oh, okay. Like, so really from that, and it's not like her parents talk about dieting all the time, but that's what she's getting from school as well. Like, apparently her friend is on all sorts of diets and all those
At
kind of things
6,
at 6.
a child is on a diet at 6. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so
So
shouldn't that just be now more, I guess, a shift to more healthy eating, and a more just a schedule of balanced eating and exercise rather than a diet per se, especially for a child of that
yes.
age? Would you
Yeah,
say?
absolutely. No, definitely.
Mm.
Um, it's it's. I think that also just comes from, I guess, the parents. If the parents is on a diet 100% all the time, and their child might display, behaviors where they eat too much sugar, they're like, well, you're coming on this diet with me, or they might even not be on a diet, but they think they are because that's what mum's on.
Yeah.
So definitely. Um, I mean, I do understand that there are some allergies and there are certain children who need to be on a specific eating
Mm.
regime. Um, but it might not be helpful to call it a diet, or also, just not creating this fear of this food is bad or this one's unhealthy. It's more just having more of a neutral approach to food.
Yes. And that approach, of course, is something that the more we speak about it, it ends up just sitting in their long-term memory. And as we're creating those neural pathways for young children, we have to be very careful with what
Yeah.
messages we're giving them. But it's getting back, I guess, to disordered eating. And despite that, so much of that is a visual effect, and we see that being physical. I guess, the effects are merely the outcome of what is a really painful emotional and mental experience for the sufferer, which we need to really take that into consideration, I guess, as well. Now, in your
Mm.
view, do you think the best way to avoid problems with disordered eating is uh, stop them from getting out of hand is to get in early, and ensure that that person actually has access to treatment and support as early as possible? What are your thoughts?
I would definitely say so because
Mm,
behaviors with food, like any behavior, the longer it's repeated, the more it's ingrained in our brains as just the go to pattern. What most of my clients have struggled for 20, 30, 40 years with eating different. I've seen most of the disorders we've talked about today. And by the time they seek out for help, it's really difficult to reframe and rewire the brain, from those behaviors being repeated so often. It becomes an automatic thing. And lots of time I work a lot with binge eaters, and myself included, you feel like your brain actually switches off, and you just watch yourself almost in the moment, um, eating the food without remorse. And that's because it's become such a habit. If you think about when you brush your teeth, you don't think about it. It's just something that happens, and that's because you've repeated the brushing of your teeth so often. The same with these behaviors. If they are repeated day in, day out, they become also like
normalized.
automatic. Yeah.
Completely understand. It just becomes part of it, sort of sits in their long-term memory as well. So
Yeah.
if we're concerned about a loved one suffering with eating disorders by seeing these patterns, a child, an adolescent, a relative, or a friend, how can we best and how should we best approach it then?
Yep. Okay. So I think it's, as hard as this might seem, it's starting a conversation about it. It might not be a direct conversation. It might just be, and talking about disordered eating in general in normal conversations, and ask them what they think about it, so it doesn't seem like it's 100% confrontational. But know that if you are going to take more of a direct approach because you are worried and you need to make sure that they are not going to harm themselves, then do know that they are going to feel like they're on the attack. They are going to feel like you have, you're against them possibly. So just making sure that you provide a safe environment where it's just you and that person having a safe conversation, letting them know that you're not judging them, you are just wanting to support them and love them as much as possible. So that is how we start those conversations, letting them know that they are not alone, and that there is actually support out there for them.
Hmm. And is it, I mean, it depends, of course, on the relationship that you have with the person as well, but do you hit the nail on the head and just approach the topic directly, or do you sort of dance around it, or is it a series of conversations? Once again, of course, how long's a piece of string? It depends on the relationship and all of that sort of
it,
stuff. But is it a combination of all of those things and always leading with empathy and love, would you say?
Yeah, I would say, I think one thing is, don't let it don't let them brush you off and you never broach the subject again. So it definitely depends on the relationship. If you have a very open relationship and there's a lot of communication, you could possibly take a very direct approach and just say, look, I'm worried. Um, you know, let's just explore some options. Um, and but if it's someone that the relationship is not as, solid, it might be a few conversations, creating awareness, um, you know, and not in your face awareness, as I said, more of a, just talking about it in general. Tell them about an article that you've read, or something like that, that would actually just help them feel okay. there is an awareness of these behaviors might not be okay. um, and then you can go into deeper conversations after that.
Yeah, because as you mentioned earlier, sometimes when, as the saying is, when you can't see the forest for the trees, and when you're in the situation, you don't realize how bad it actually is if you are the sufferer. So, like, I'd love to know from your perspective, why is it so important that we talk about it in general? Do you think that in some way, by openly talking about it, it's almost like acknowledging that the situation is real to the sufferer, which they can be in denial about, which can sometimes be the first step in the direction of helping them heal? Like, what are your thoughts?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Like for myself, I 100% thought that my behavior was the correct way of living and everyone else was wrong. So, but I didn't read, I didn't see articles about disordered eating. You know, I saw articles about anorexia and bulimia. I didn't have those. So for me, it was like, well, you know, I'm just very strict with myself, and I just exercise a lot, and then I can't control myself. Whereas if I possibly had more support in with understanding that these behaviors are actually disordered, I would have probably had more awareness around that, and probably um, been persistent with asking for help sooner, I guess.
So, overall, then, and given that you had experienced it for 13 years, in your opinion, how much of this do you think ends up being a psychological issue as opposed to being a physical issue, in the sense that, once again, we see what's happening through through the person's physicality, but I mean, it always anchors down to something that is deeper in the conscious or subconscious mind, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. So usually it's got nothing to do with the food or the actual body. It's about our own beliefs and our own views about ourselves. And, um, the belief that we don't belong, or we won't be accepted unless we change our outward appearance.
Hmm.
Um, and that is all based on beliefs, our thoughts we think, the emotions that we have. That's one part of it. Then you also have obviously emotional triggers like trauma, um, and it might not be trauma. It might even just be every day-to-day stress. Sometimes people just start using food as a way to cope with what's going on in the world.
Yes.
COVID was a really good example when everyone's like, there's all this food in my pantry. The food was always in the pantry, but all of a sudden it was now just an escape or a way for us to just really,
A coping
um,
mechanism. Yeah.
yeah, cope with it.
Mm. Okay, it's a big topic to approach today. So thank you for going there with me. If we were to summarize your key messages from your article, which of course which is the link is in the show notes, and if from everything that we've discussed today, what would your key messages be for anyone watching and listening?
Okay. Well, my key messages is, look out for the signs. If you are experiencing these signs, also don't be afraid to, approach someone and look for help. You're not alone. There's so many people struggling with this. It's definitely not a stigma. It's not something to be embarrassed about. So that's number one. Number two is, you know, try and help whoever's going through this as soon as possible. There's so many resources out there. There's so many professionals that can actually help. The other thing is make sure that you reach out to someone who is actually experienced in this field. So if you're searching for psychologists or organizations, make sure that they actually understand disordered eating, um, because otherwise you might delay the process of healing. You
Hmm.
know, so I think those are the ones. And then the third one was actually just creating the awareness, um, and for us to be open to speak about this and not having this being a taboo subject. It's so real.
The more that we talk
We
about it, the more we normalize it for somebody else, don't we?
exactly.
Yeah, and of course, as you were just mentioning, obviously making sure that the organisations that you do reach out to for support are accredited. We'll have the links through to Kids Helpline and also the Butterfly Foundation Helpline, which are both free numbers as well. And
Yes.
in saying that, if anyone would like to reach out to you, of course, Stel, whereabouts can they find you?
Yes, absolutely. You can look for me. My website is wholesomelifestyleproject.com. I am also on Instagram, Wholesome Lifestyle Project. I also have a podcast
Mhm.
called Beyond Overeating by Wholesome Lifestyle Project. Or you can come and find me actually on Kiddopedia. I do have all my contact details are in the profile section there as well.
Which is perfect. And we'll have all of those links in the show notes, Stel. Thank you so much for your time today. And I really look forward to chatting with you again in the not too distant future. In the meantime, stay safe and speak soon. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.